Here we are on the fourth session of Mycelial Approaches to Transformative Collaborations, part of the Now What gathering in October, November 2021. And we're doing a little bit of harvesting and sense making around what we've learned so far.
So for me, this whole process in itself has actually been a learning process. So besides all the interesting conversations we had on the content of mycelium and our mycelial approach, for me, this was really a deep dive into an online process and how that resonates or not resonates with me, being a very grounded kind of person and doing a lot of local projects. So I guess from an experiment point of view, I would definitely say it's a success. I did feel some stretching of my comfort zone. And also what I have found very interesting about this process specifically is letting go of this idea that you need a very clear direction and outcomes and, you know, generally how you step into things. So actually applying the mycelial approach to how we work was also part of the experiment. And I have to say, I do find it challenging. I'll be really honest about it. So not having this really clear target and expectation of what's expected of you. It's challenging in terms of motivation, I find. And it'd be interesting to hear if anyone else senses that, you know, with all the priorities going on in our individual lives. How do you prioritize something that doesn't have a very clear direction? Yeah, so that's a question I have more than anything. Yeah.
Okay. So just chipping in on the back of what Zaira was saying, I have found the approach incredibly interesting and learning. And I must admit, I'm a bit like Zaira. I was looking for the thing that we hook onto. It was the theme which would bind us together. And I think, Ben, compliments to you and Joe about, you know, allowing me to let go of that, because this process has been highly interesting. And looking at it from the other side of my own personal endeavor to set up this leadership program, I let go of the tempo, keeping my own urgency, and decided to let it form. And that's where the mycelial analogy has kicked in. So rather than hunting the ones that I was looking for to contribute to the modules of a program, I have moved sometimes serendipitously, sometimes consciously. And just because energy was in the field, I had expressed to the universe that I wanted certain things, or I was hungry for certain things. I have about half of the people that I need for the program already just gravitating. And so it wasn't, I didn't design it. And so this program and that experience has convinced me of the value of just being. And if you're exuding, you're radiating this desire and maybe desirable future, that a lot of great things just happen. So that's been my biggest learning from this whole thing. So I'm grateful that I was brought on board, Ben, and that I was able to listen.
I really came to say, well, no, I didn't come to say, but what I'm saying is, unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here for all the sessions. In fact, it's only one other session I took part in. So in that sense, I didn't fully get the full scope of what you're talking about. And maybe my learning is somewhat limited, but I did come with the key question, because the mycelium sort of approach is really nature's way of looking after itself, healing itself, regeneration, and communicating across itself, the connections and all of that. And so when I look at the title of this session, is Mycelial Approaches to Transformative Collaboration, it raises sort of an expectation in me that the Mycelial approach is an approach which can be planned for, is an intervention that you can introduce into a group or into a situation, and is very much something which is directed. And to me, that didn't ring true, because that's, although in hindsight, when you look at what the mycelium does in nature, you could say, yes, it's done all of these things. It's not something it went out to do in the first place, as I perceive it, at least. It's not something that was planned or controlled and so on, but very much a natural way of interweaving and doing things. And that requires, and so when I think, what does that mean in human terms? And to me, what it means for in human terms is we're probably too focused on planning, on interventions, and not enough on just letting be and letting go, which is roughly what Grant has just been and Sarah have just been describing in many respects. So, and I think that's to me that's still is the key thing. When I think about, well, where else does that happen in human interactions? It doesn't, because it doesn't happen many places, but the one place where I feel the way it does happen, and which at least some of us are familiar with, is in open space. Because in open space, you don't have the plan. There's no plan. There's no program. There's no agenda, and it's and things happen serendipitously. Serendipitously. Oh, I can't say the whole word. With serendipity. And synchronicity, as described by Jung and so on, and so maybe another way of looking at it, but would be for me, certainly the way I'm looking at this, well, how can we bring something like open space, and I'm not saying it has to be open space, but something like open space into our everyday lives, so that we behave much more like, or take a more Mycelial approach, if that's the right word. So whether I've learned something or not, it's certainly caused me to reflect a lot. So I'll stop there.
Yes, I think I bring quite a different opinion to Francois. I think mycelial approaches, or that way of serendipitously connecting and interacting and responding to the environment in what I'm going to label needs-driven or possibility-driven growth. I think it happens everywhere all the time. And it's how I feel at the moment about the side of us and society that appears to control things, is that it's more an illusion than anything else. So even our decision making, and that's not something I'm saying, but there's science, kind of all manner of biochemistry, psychology, etc., science backing up the notion that most of our decisions are actually driven by our bacteria, by our mood, by the things interacting with us, even by the soil around us. So I think a lot of the approaches that we've used to control our environment and our interactions are actually more kind of a linear map of a desired possession of will, which is really specific to the culture I grew up in and the culture that I think is represented mostly in this call. So if you go to other cultures that have a more non-linear approach to decision making and interaction, they would not, very few would say that anybody's in control of anything, but that kind of the needs and the possibilities drive the agency of the interactions. And that's how it feels. Not only, unfortunately, I also missed all of the sessions except for the first one. So I was kind of trusting the mycelial growth happening as I wasn't here and I'm not necessary for this. And finding that interaction incredibly strong in the work that I have been doing actually on the ground in Glasgow. It just felt like an enormous container where we made the conditions right for mycelial interactions to happen. So I guess what I'm interested in is how do I make the conditions for increasing our awareness of that mycelial interaction and allowing it to flow in a way that is not preventing it to happen. And I saw a lot of that from different groups coming together, knowing, oh, you're doing the same, I'm doing similar, oh, this is interesting for you, and just happening, things that start feeling like magic when you meet the right person in the right moment and you're like, how does this happen? And I for me, it's not magic, it's really that needs driven and future driven agency that I think drives a lot of the natural world.
Just to move into the space early this morning, I yesterday afternoon looked at one of Suzanne Simard's videos, and one of the comments she made was about how many kilometers of mycelium are underneath one footprint. And so that sort of inspires me to think that in our social world that there may be kilometers of mycelium underneath, that it's there. And just personally in my life, I've made the decision to sort of move in that direction, recognizing that what I value most is this sort of approach to living and working and so on. A question that came up this morning for me is, I was thinking about it in terms of network engagement, but the question of why is it so hard for us to be interested in each other and develop those relationships in our working life, in our vocations. That's the sort of challenge. And I think the other challenge is I appreciated learning about the 3 different kinds of mycelium. And that's been sort of a guide too. I think in my life, I naturally am oriented towards the sharing resources and the flowing and the reciprocal relationships. But I've interpreted the parasitical mycelium to be a breaking down. So what's challenging for me going forward is being more conscious about breaking down the structures that aren't beneficial. I think there's a third thing, but I can't remember what it is. So
Recycling.
Yeah. Is,
There's the breaking down dead matter. There's the parasitizing of living things that breaks them down, and there's the collaborative
mhm.
mycorrhizal versions. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you could say the parasitical ones are the first ones to start breaking down that which is obsolete, and then you have the other
Oh,
mushrooms moving in to then break it down into smaller parts so that
oh,
you
okay,
cycle. So they're like the processors.
okay. Is there access to your slide? I appreciate that, so I can.
I don't think I can share that one, but I can share my article that I wrote. that
Okay,
has
okay,
what's up.
that's great.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe we can grab some images too from that.
Okay,
Was there more,
so
Mary? And then we jumped in.
I think I'm complete. There was a third thing, but I don't remember what it is.
Maybe I'll
Vicky hasn't gone yet.
yeah, Vicky and Joe and me.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll hop in, if that's all right. Interesting to hear these reflections and this question of intent that was spoken about in the beginning. I think it seems to me, I wouldn't say that mycelium has no intention. It's just that there isn't, it's more that there isn't something top down. There isn't even a core group that's sort of making a decision. It's this much more distributed sensing across an ecosystem, but very much with a purpose. And in our case, the purpose was to do some action learning around what mycelial approaches might be, in whatever form that came to us, and so I think that got there was a very distributed, sort of fragmented experience of that. Some stuff was well defined, maybe other stuff didn't, wasn't. People weren't sure how to step into that invitation, perhaps. And I guess the other thing I would say though is that to me, at the heart of the mycelial approach is building relationships, right? So the mycelium is making all these little connections. And so whatever we did, we were sort of declaring there's value in that, and that we're always building those connections. At the core team level, we were doing that with the people that showed up for the conference, with the people that have expressed interest here and now what. And the mushrooms manifest from that when the conditions are right, rather than forcing it, which I think is part of what I'm hearing from others as a takeaway too. And so there's a little story around that just feels really sweet to me. I don't know that I have some particular sort of aha that comes out of it, as much as just saying, yeah, this is how it works. Maybe there is a lesson there again about the working at the relational level and trusting the value of that, right? That what can emerge that is going to make a difference is actually going to emerge from that. As much as we might try to, yes, we have intentions, we have a larger vision, the mycelium does intend to produce mushrooms, although it's not its main purpose. And maybe that's another switch to talk about. But anyway, here's the story that I think is a nice one to show how things can happen out of the relational levels. Madeline Charney showed up in the first of our 4 sessions here in Now What, and she and I are working together on a bioregional project in Western Massachusetts, where she lives, and we put this request out, or we create an opportunity for people to share invitations for their own kind of ways to explore mycelial approaches. What would you like to do? Do you have a question? Is there a conversation? Is there a process? Is there some action learning? And Madeline is in the middle of doing a very intensive, like 6-month-long training on forest guided nature walks as a therapeutic experience. And she needs to do one more session, facilitate one more session to complete this coursework. So she put into our little spreadsheet that she was interested in doing that. And that was 3 weeks ago, in the beginning of Now What. Last week, I was sitting in the Now What Cafe, which is this very sort of mycelial space in between all the different engagement streams and more scheduled and structured activities. And in pops a person I had never met before, who I'm not even sure how they had heard about Now What. I'm not sure they were sure, but somehow the relational connections, web drew them here. And the first thing they did was to put themselves on the map, which to me is one of the more, it's one of the ways to really see the mycelium in, mycelial aspects of Now What. And then not only did they do that, but they went looking at the profiles of other people on the map and found someone that they wanted to meet and sent them an email. And then that person, who happened to be one of the original crew that was present to the birth of Now What, but hadn't showed up for a year, said, hey, why don't we meet in the cafe? So all of a sudden, one person I haven't seen in a long time, but I'm delighted to see, and a totally new person, show up in the cafe because of this little thing that happened through, the asynchronous space of the mapping and the email, and then here they are, and we have a lovely conversation. In the middle of the conversation, I'm also browsing through the map. And nature is coming up, and the importance of being connected to nature is very much coming up. And I'm browsing through the map, and I see that Naomi, who was the person I knew, had put herself on the map and had drawn a connection to somebody, to Madeline, saying she wanted to meet her. I'm like, oh, well, Madeline wants to do this nature walk. Naomi wants to meet Madeline. Sebastian's into the whole thing, and I say, hey, you want to get together with Madeline and do this? She's got this invitation out there. Then I look at Madeline on the map, and she wants to meet Lev Natan, who I also know and who I know would be really into this. So we send an email out to try to get the 5 of us together. And it's now happening on Sunday, and Madeline's inviting even more people. And it turns out that Sebastian knows about this exact program, this 6-month-long program that Madeline has done, and was thinking of doing it themselves, but decided not to for various reasons. So it's just all very tightly knit, and this thing just sprung up. And, I don't know, we might have a dozen people show up for this thing on Sunday. So it just felt delicious to me. And it might have been the first time that the map got used in that way, and the cafe. I always sort of imagined that that's kind of what it's there for and what it could do. It goes back, I think, to your really powerful question, Mary. Man, what does it take for people to get interested in wanting to really connect with each other and know one another? And why does it seem like we don't make time for that? We don't have time for that. We don't value that. At least some of us. I think there are many people who do. And maybe it loops back into this question of urgency and tempo and timing that you've been such a vocal advocate for, or namer of, Grant. I think somehow we short circuit the value of the mycelial connecting because we think we have to plan top down to get stuff done in the next 2 years, maybe. So with that, I will wrap. And I see you wanting to jump in, Zaira.
Yeah, you're stimulating my thinking. So one of the thoughts I had when I was talking earlier, I talked also a little bit about my apprehension about the internet, and I know I've talked about it with you, about stretching my comfort zone. And I think this discomfort very much relates to the lack of having these other type of interactions than transactional, so like I'm very open to when I meet people, I meet people all the time, but then you kind of have this intuitive feeling and process. And what I really love about this process that you have with the Now What is it feels a little bit like being in a village square, but then with all people that kind of have similar interests to you. So the thing is, when I'm in my town, when I'm in front of the school of my kids, I meet a dozen people that I have this kind of, connection from the heart, like we connect maybe at a very chemical levels, like, hey, I like you, let's have fun. But then none of these people are busy with regeneration in any way, but then when I'm online in this internet world, it's very transactional, and it makes me feel like I'm not using all my senses, and it's like you have to come with your agenda, and it stresses me out sometimes, So yeah, this is kind of interesting in that sense that it's a little bit like the real life process, you know, which is much more flowy and people based, just with potentially more interesting people intellectually, you know.
Thank you. I like hearing that.
When I began this journey with three of you, Ben, Zaira, and Grant, I did not know what we were creating together. I did not know what was going to happen, I think. And if I may speak, it was true to each one of us, you know, the invitation itself, Ben curating that invitation, and then we jumping right in and talking about who we were and how we were approaching this and trying to find ourselves in this approach, our hesitations, our stories, our placements, our positions, our perspectives, our learnings, our unlearnings, everything came out in the co-creation process of that Evolve 2021 talk. I wasn't even sure until the day of the talk what I was going to talk about. And, you know, Ben saw me in that discomfort, not knowing what was presenting itself to me in this approach. And the one thing I did trust that gave me the solace was I knew you three. I had a relationship with all of you. And in that relationship, I was finding myself. What was emerging for me? What was true and valid for me? What was dying for me? And I have shifted as an individual. And on that day, I listened. It was truly like I get these notes from universe. Somebody writes them, but it sends out, it comes as notes from universe. And on that day, it was about the three phases of how we grow up, the facing the fears, mastering the challenges, applying the wisdom to the later stages of life. That's exactly what I needed to hear, because that's what I was transitioning in my own life, looking at my previous versions of who I was. And then this commitment of sharing that experience, wanting to explore further what's in it for me. And I will say this is my second. The last one was the first, and this is the second one last week. But the mycelial approach has not left me. The container has shifted. These conversations was not where I was having them, but I was still generative in relationship outside this container. So the shift had already happened for me to take and apply that to the different containers that I was engaging in. Mary, you and I, we silently undergroundish, you know, have a conversation that's exploring much more deeper sides of how we let the system see itself, not let, but like create spaces for the system to see itself. And we are engaging in that conversation, and it's being built on this highly, I'm interested in your perspective, I'm relating to your perspective, because I am interested in me, how I am shifting.
Mm.
My relationship with me is defining the relationship with you and the relationship with the system. And that is generative for me. And the story, each one of us has been presenting their perspectives on this mycelial approach. And all I'm hearing are individual stories of how we are coming at it. And that collectively in this container is the story of the mycelium. And it'll shift when the container shifts, when the agents in the container shifts. And that becomes another story. So that's how I'm making sense of all of this. To summarize, And I also am part of the social systems mapping community. And I said, map by itself does not have a story. It's the agents in the map that are telling their stories. It's creating space for those stories to come to light. And that's in dialogue, in conversation, when you do a very good job of that, bringing that conversations to light to make space for that. And in those spaces, when we hear those stories, we then sense into the story of the map in the moment. And that's where we connect and we create a relationship and we say, hey, I'm inspired to do this with you. Let's move. And that movement, that change is a generative change. And I know, as is with any eco cycle, it's going to die, but as long as there is energy, as long as there is interest in each other, Mary, in your language, I think the change will come. I think the change will happen, and it is in that. And when it dies, the death needs to be honored as well, because it has taught us something. Celebrating all aspects of it. So that's what I'm taking. I know it. I didn't plan for this to come out, but I'm really grateful that I have audience and I have been witnessed, and I'm truly, truly. I feel seen, even though I'm not on video, but I do feel seen. Hence the multi-dimensionality of all our beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Video's overrated.
I'm wanting to what extent we are really having or developing an approach. I started to think it's more like a mindset or even a perspective that once you put it on, you can't just undo it anymore. You know, you've kind of seen it from that other side. So maybe it's more a mycelial experience.
I think if I may respond to that, Zaira, I think transformation, a crucial piece, transformation number one for me is a journey, and it's a continuous integration process where you let go and let be, right? Like, and I come from organization space where, you know, transformations are the destination. Let's get there, right? Like that's what we were trying to do when I was in organizations. And it's a journey, and a journey of integration. If we are not able to listen, learn, and integrate what it means to me as an individual to own courageously my own action, we are not accounting for the shifts. And I believe that is what we are seeking, and we find solace in that, in doing that. That's exactly what we are all doing right now, right? We feel drawn to each other because we feel solace in it.
Well, I think I came to some of the pre-NAOT discussions that you had back last winter when we were sort of discussing. So I was kind of very much aware of this, even if I hadn't joined in. But, you know, I spent the first 10 years of my kind of journey, if you like, very much living within this space. And I got involved in astrology, and I see the world. I mean, you're talking about transformation, you know, the kind of the like rings of a tree that we can go in and live from a very small version of life of the ego personal journey, and then if we have the kind of space and the ability to relax into the bigger circles of life, we can kind of draw in more and more connections until we understand the whole connectedness, the universal connectedness. And I think that's where we're at as a race. You know, we've been kind of bouncing in and out for highly spiritual people to the Western way, which is almost completely not, you know, in the cultural understanding of a secular society, you know, and we're ready to release those boundaries again and step back into that way, which that's, for me, is totally exciting. And I like to relate that to the sort of the rings of the solar system and each planet. As we discovered each planet over the last couple of 100 years, we lived, even if we didn't know that culturally we took on the archetype of each. I won't go into all that, but I find that so fascinating that when we discovered the revolutionary plans of Uranus in the 1700s, we had revolutions and we had electricity revolutionizing our life. And you can look into the stories of all that all the way through, which is amazing. And when we realize that our lives are just part of a whole big story, whether it's just the Earth story or the solar system or the galactic story, we'll kind of then you can that's when I kind of really, you know, I have to notice that, because my second 10 years are very much caught up in fear, going into really difficult journeys, and I kind of, the synchronicity of me arriving here is that I'm just coming out the end of that, and I'm able to put a container on that and see, okay, now I've got a new project I want to put out into the world. And a year ago, I would have been, well, even a couple of days ago, I'd have been, oh my God, I haven't got any social network anymore. I've gone into a hermit, and how am I ever going to get this project out? And then I come here and you remind me that all I have to do is just let it go into the world and trust that it will connect in the way it needs to connect. And that's puts me back to where I was living 10 years ago, when I was kind of completely, it's not that it disappeared, but I wasn't in that spaciousness of it. I get, you know, kind of tensing up with all the things, life, you know, life goes on, and that's what we as a culture are doing. We're getting bound up in life instead of remembering just to release into the transformation process. I think that's me.
Yes, this time it was. Yeah, I'm again wondering about the conditions for the thriving of mycelial networks, and similar. It doesn't just have to be that, but just going back to, and I think it's an important symbol for societies. One of the things that are most destructive for mycelial networks is rotivating and cultivating the soil as we do it. So the mechanized breaking of the soil, which is something that we embarrassingly still do in our agriculture. It feels really similar to several processes that are happening right now, or that there is a possibility for that to happen. So there was this kind of inoculation or cross inoculation happening during the last 2 weeks, in person and online, and a lot of activity. And now there is the way that the system worked to bring this to happen means that people had to travel, people had to go over amazing hoops of all sorts, and they have to do that now to go back to where they are. So there is a break, there is an exhaustion that I'm feeling myself, that it just feels like this is cutting the continuation of the mycelial work. So there is the inoculation, but then we need to keep that environment safe. We need to keep the structure kind of in integrity. And I think that's one of the places where something can act at an institutional level, because that's, to some degree, that's where the things are coming to cut, because you have a system that doesn't want us to, maybe intentionally or not, but a system that tends to prevent us from keeping the integrity of the mycelial network. I don't know why that kind of arose listening to all of you.
The system composter. Now, that's not like a plow, a trowel, right? That's different. Okay.
No.
Okay, that's an important distinction. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a really, I want to say juicy, but that's not a mycelial adjective. Connecting, interweaving, interpenetrating session for me, and a lovely way to wrap up this cycle within Now What. I think it feels like some mushrooms just popped up here. And we'll see what spores this recording might cast and where things might go.
It was nutritious.
Delicious. Okay.
Dita, don't forget to drop the link into the chat. I can't find your session.
Yeah, we'll get that for you. And any other final words before we part for now? All right, I think we are complete.